Okay, great. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to Policy Exchange. Delighted that we've got such a good turnout for tonight. We're pleased to welcome the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Bernard Hogan-Howe, who will, like his predecessor, Sir Paul Stevenson, speak to us tonight on a wide-ranging degree of subjects. We had Paul Stevenson here actually a year ago this month. Since then, we've had a pretty tumultuous time in policing, especially in London. We had the August riots, obviously. We had the continuing tough financial situation. And within the Met itself, we've had changes in leadership, ongoing inquiries into phone hacking and corruption allegations and allegations of racism. And obviously, with less than a year in post, just 73 days from now, the Commissioner will lead the Met Police in the policing of the London 2012 Olympics. Since taking up his position, Bernard Hogan-Howe has signalled a new openness and a belief in engaging with all types of audiences, as he will be doing this evening. During his time as a popular Chief Constable in Merseyside between 2004 and 2009, the Commissioner was known for his skills on a horse. He's since displayed those at football matches as a mounted officer in London. But he also had an impressive record in Merseyside, driving down crime far in excess of the national average while improving detection rates, cutting costs while making the officers in Merseyside more, not less, visible, and delivering more for less in terms of a better victim service, more assets seized from offenders and fewer complaints against officers. I think what strikes you from his record as a chief officer is his belief in visible leadership, clear communication, and a focus on the basics, cutting crime, keeping costs down, and both of those things in the years before these were popular. This all chimes very well, I think, with Policy Exchange's mantra, which is about being smart on crime, supporting innovation with policies that are evidence-led and fiscally sound. We've argued for reform in this area, and tonight we'll hear about the Commissioner's total policing philosophy, as well as his plans for reform at Scotland Yard. We have another treat in store, not on the invitation. Earlier this month, as you all know, the electorate in London returned Boris Johnson as mayor, and subsequently a new deputy mayor for policing, Stephen Greenhalgh, has been designated, subject to confirmation by the Assembly, and Stephen is here this evening. He'll be saying a few words by way of a vote of thanks at the end. The Commissioner will speak for about 25 minutes, and then that'll leave us plenty of time for audience Q&A. So if you can join me in welcoming the Commissioner of Police of the Metropolis.
Right, good evening, everybody. I'm sorry that some people appear to be stood, so the 25 minutes I'll try and concentrate a bit, but it's good to see everybody here tonight, and thanks for taking the time to be here. I'm going to talk about two broad areas, if that's okay, in my 25 minutes. One is about the Met and what Blair sketched out there, and secondly I'm going to move into, and I hope it will be seamless, but you'll see whether or not you agree, a little about communications data, particularly around technology, because I think it's a good opportunity for us to consider that at a time when it's becoming quite a public debate, particularly with politicians as a bill passes through Parliament. So seeing as I know there are a few politicians in the audience, perhaps there's an opportunity to engage in that debate. I'm going to start just to talking a little about the job of Commissioner. As Blair said, there has been quite a lot of change in the Met, of which I've been a beneficiary, but it's not been particularly good for the Met. You know, that sort of level of change doesn't really do anyone much good, whether it be the organisation or the people it serves. But that's where we are. But it has left quite a lot of change, including the top team is changing. So there's Simon here tonight as a new member of the team. The police team, we now have 4 new members, new deputy, 2 new assistant commissioners. So that's a change. We're waiting to recruit a director of resources, a director of HR, for reasons that might be obvious, but a head of press. But, you know, things move on. But my fundamental point is obviously that there has been a lot of change at that level. For those who have anything to do with the police service, often people look up and say, well, if you were to remove the strategic head of this organisation, how would things be? And often the return on the ground is far better. But of course, it can't survive like that for long. So we do need some stability. But I don't want to confuse stability with inertia. There's an awful lot to do. We need some stability in terms of decision making, but that's not to be confused with not requiring change. I am proud to do the job. We have around 50,000 staff. We have a budget of £3.5 billion, and it's our task to keep safe the 7.5 million people in London. It's a huge task. We get about 6 million telephone calls a year. They tell us about 2 million people visit London every day. It is, by any dimensions, a huge responsibility. We have 98 different units. So we have 32 boroughs. 32 boroughs in London, we have 32 basic command units. We have another 68 units that deal with things like kidnap, counter-terrorism, IT, transport. It's a big organisation. Between September the 26th and Christmas last year, I saw the middle managers, all the people who ran those 98 units. Now, they all traipsed into my office for about half an hour. And I only have one question for them. If you're going to do the job I'm going to do sat in that chair, what would you do differently? And I asked them as a group what did they think, and then as individuals, because groupthink can defeat a really good idea. So by Christmas, I got a lot of ideas, and there were some common themes. And building on those common themes is part of what is going to drive us for the future. In terms of the context for reform of Scotland Yard, there's a financial challenge. Now, the Met has been protected this year to a large extent, while the other 42 forces in the country are having their grant reduced to something of the order of about 14% over the next 3 or 4 years. We received £90 million until probably a few weeks ago we couldn't guarantee. That's allowed us to keep our police officer numbers at around 32,300. And that's a great opportunity during the Olympics. It's a great opportunity anyway. It has really provided us with some thinking time as well. Bearing in mind the context, new team, lots of challenges, Olympics coming up, Diamond Jubilee, but it's given us some time to plan for what is coming. So in years 13 to 15, we've got to find something of the order of around 360 million at least. It probably is nearer to 500 million out of the 3.5 billion budget. Now, it will be possible. But any organisation contracting at that rate will find that it's quite a challenge. So we do need some thinking time. But the £90 million has been particularly important. That's come partly from the Treasury and partly from the GLA, the last mayor, who has now become the new mayor. We've got to think about policing in an era where protest is likely to become more likely rather than less. And as we know in the police, then trying to strike the balance between preserving the right of people to protest compared to the rights of others, not to be subject to crime and not to have their rights overwhelmed, is quite a difficult challenge at times. It's also a challenge because every time we have a big protest in London, and sometimes these marches can take something of the order of 4,000 police officers, there is only one pool marked 32 boroughs. So the policing in the boroughs can deteriorate because we have to drag them into the middle of the city. But we do not have, as the French have, a CRS. We do not have a National Guard. I don't think we necessarily need it. But it does produce huge pressures within London and sometimes across the country to provide that sort of support. We've got to think about racism and community tensions. There are a couple of things I wanted to mention here. You'll be aware, and I'm quite happy to answer questions on some of the recent cases, one of which was particularly highlighted was the one in Newham, where a police officer is alleged to have been recorded making a racist comment against someone they'd arrested. And then there have been other cases that we've heard of. Now, that particular case for me was a horrible thing, because if true, if that word was used against someone, I don't understand how someone finds it in the heart to use it. I've got angry in the past. We all get overwhelmed by events. You can be stressed. But where does that come from in someone to use that type of behaviour? So I don't want that. And if we're still getting that, then that would be a shock. I'm not sure we're alone in society, but we're supposed to be the police. We're supposed to represent the best, not exhibit the worst. So that, I think, is a real challenge and something that we are going to do something about. And if asked, I'll say a little about what we've done already. We have our new designate deputy mayor here. It is a new form of political accountability. It changed in London on the 16th of January. So on the 16th of January, the old police authority, and our Lord Harris is here tonight as a member of the old authority and a chair from the past. But that committee went, and now we have a single person. And for a short time, that was Kit Malthouse. I don't think we really got into a new rhythm. Bearing in mind, you've got the 16th of January, then you've got the May elections on May the 3rd. Really, the new system didn't kick in. We hadn't enough time for that. And the mayoral election was the thing that was driving really everything as we went forward. So we have to get to a new dynamic in terms of that political accountability. The rest of the country will come to that in around November of this year. So the police authorities will go and a single elected person will arrive. And they will have to deal with that too. I've set a challenge for us to be the best police force in this country and then the world. The reason we used that in Merseyside, and we found it effective, was 2 or 3 reasons. For those who've heard this before, I apologise for being boring, but it is consistent. Which is that, it really is about saying that I think it's honourable to aim to be the best. I don't aim to be 17th. And I don't accept the argument, just because it's London, that is an excuse for failure. I think it can be a lever for change. I think it can be a catalyst for being great. But I don't accept the argument that it's okay to be 43 out of 40, 43rd out of 43. I just don't think that's, you know, the truth. Because for every, and I know it's business speak, but for every challenge there is an opportunity. As we know at the moment, you know, if you look at the CCTV system in the city, it's far better than Saffron Walden. You know, you think about the opportunities around the tube, about things that help us to detect and prevent crime. There are many things that occur in London which gives opportunities as well as challenges. I'll give you just one simplistic example, but as far as I know, the burglars in London leave their fingerprints at the same rate as they do in Norwich. So why is there a differential rate of discovery of them? Why does it take us longer to find them if we find a fingerprint? We've got to do something about that that makes the things that are common done as well here as they are elsewhere. And the very first and the major thing for me is it's not okay to say, well, because we're London, we accept that as a default argument. If we get to that point where we accept that London is so different we cannot be held to account, that's fine. There's a logic behind that. But it's not okay to not at least challenge that assumption. We have developed, as Blair said, the idea of total policing. Everybody's got the brand. Many of you work for commercial organisations, and you've gone through various parts of your organisation where new missions come along. Well, it's ours for as long as I'm there. Now, you said, you know, at the rate at which we're going, it might be about 6 months, but, you know, we'll see. But my plan is for 7 years. I've got a contract out to explain this to Stephen. I've got a contract for 5. I say 7 because if I say 5, after year 4, my power goes out the door. And it just seems to me that, you know, whether somebody else may choose to get rid of me, you know, you have to accept that. I'm not the person who decides that. But it seems to me that somewhere between 4 and 7, either someone decides actually move on, or you make your own decision. But I don't see any reason in giving away your last 12 months. So for me, it's a long-term ambition that we can start to invest in. So we said total. The total is just a very simple idea, which is that there are 50,000 people in the police. They cannot impose their will on 7.5 million people, nor should they. But working as a team, we can achieve great things. And the police service I know grown up in is fantastically efficient and effective when it works as teams. When it works as individuals, it gets inconsistent. It doesn't achieve what we can. It also actually helps to work with partners, and it also actually helps to work with the community. Even if you just looked at detection. 3 ways to detect crime. You either catch them doing it, forensics lead you to the offender, or someone tells you who did it. And generally the community, or victims, or whoever, knows who did it. So if you've got a good relationship, they will tell us, for various reasons. Informants do it for money and other motives. Victims do it because they want to catch the offender. There are many reasons why people will help to where they can, and we need to make sure that we're providing a reasonable service. We said we're trying to keep it simple, so we have 3 broad ideas under that total theme. The first is to have a total war on crime. I use those words advisedly because war can be an emotive word. But the idea is to do everything that's legal and ethical, and those are really important, to put the criminal on the back foot. One of the things that I was proudest of in Merseyside, we did achieve some big changes with reduced crime and antisocial behaviour by about 35%. And admittedly recorded crime. That's what I can talk to you about. I can't always talk to you about the rest, although we did see reductions in British Crime Survey too. But principally for me, 2 of the big things that I found really powerful was that our number of complaints dropped from having been at one time about the worst per head in the country to being the best, despite the fact that Liverpool, Merseyside is quite a challenging area. And the civil litigation dropped too. So it wasn't just the crime tactics which we really plugged hard. It was also the fact we did a lot of values-based work culturally with our staff to say, 1, how do we deal with each other, and in turn, how it might improve the way we deal with the public. So it was a long-term work that we did through leaders, but it was that frankly developed the quality, which I'm going to return to later. I have said that I want us to, just 2 of the aspects I just want to touch on briefly. For every crime, we do not detect every offence. It varies around the country, and about a quarter of all crime is detected. About 97% of murders, but a very low percentage, under 10% for car crime. Remember the 3 factors I talked about. You know, catch them doing it, forensics, or someone tells you did it. Murders, we put lots of resource into it, pretty effective. Car crime, high volume, less able to put the same resource into it. We do not see the same benefits. Could be better, but broadly they're the spread. But for me, the 3 out of 4 who do not see the benefit of their suspect going through the criminal justice system still need some care. So therefore, the second leg of the total policing is to have total care for victims. And they come to us in different guises. They come to us psychiatrically ill. They come to us sometimes speaking English as a second or third language, or just stressed by the trauma of the crime. Whichever way they come, seems to me they deserve our care. And the final part is to be totally professional in the way we're doing the first two. If we're totally professional in the way we stop crime and arrest offenders or help a victim, we'll not be too far wrong, I think, of what we need to achieve. The final part of the total, which we haven't developed into total yet, but I suspect we might, which is total technology. We are a people business. 80% of our money, our budget is invested in people. But I think I prefer to have a professional army than I would to have a conscript army. And if that meant that we ended up with less people, but better technology, which enabled us to fight crime or help victims, then I think that'd be a better life to have. We invest about £220 million a year out of the £3.5 billion in technology, IT. I would say it's not very good. Now, I don't know. When I'd said that to the BBC earlier. We had a meeting earlier this morning with some of their news producers, and they all groan together. Ours are poor too. And I don't know how many organisations feel they've got fantastic IT, but some people have managed it. My argument would be we've invested in lots of lists. We can tell you how many burglars there were yesterday. What about a piece of kit that actually stops it? And there is kit like that out there. Automatic number plate recognition, facial recognition, fingerprints on the street. But we haven't invested in that in the proportions to which we should get a benefit. And then the second thing we haven't done really is we haven't organised ourselves as a business, an organisation, to reap the rewards of that. And if we're not careful, we regard this number plate camera in the corner, this pinging thing, as a burden. In some parts of the country, they've turned it off. It's been so irritating. It's so irritating, it keeps telling you no insurance, murderer, might carry drugs. But I'm afraid that's the sad reality. Because when you get 6 million telephone calls a year, and at this time of night, between 6 and 9, the control room will be overwhelmed, and the ability to respond will be limited. We will rationalise, we will prioritise. And somebody said, and by the way, this thing just keeps telling you that car's got no insurance, and it's just told you that somebody's on bail, then, for goodness sake, can't you just... So if we're not careful, we go out and stop by random cars. But which would you prefer? So I think we need a strategy to do something about that with all the technology that's available. And if we just lingered over ANPR for a second, I think there are at least 3 layers of ANPR. At the moment, that's what charges you, obviously, for your congestion charge. Fantastic motive, isn't it? Well, it works. You can't easily avoid it. But, of course, there are 3 different layers for ANPR. There's the fixed sites, of which that is one, but there are police ones too. There are mobile ones, so we put them in vehicles and we move the vehicles around. And that means that you can move an ANPR system around the city if you use them in wolf packs. And the third layer, which I would call a tertiary layer, is that ANPR that is used for business or public service purposes to which we might plug in. So bear in mind these things that drive around the roads need fuel, and they go into things called petrol stations, and many of the petrol stations have ANPR. But where does that feed into this great strategy? And the short answer at the moment is it doesn't. They go into car parks, they go into fuel stations. They've got to go into that system somewhere, and yet we haven't got a coherent way of dealing with it. So for me, I think our investments in technology have been sporadic, have been ad hoc, but I think there remain great opportunities to make a lot of the investments already, and potentially there's far more that could be done. Now, there's a discussion that we might get into about civil liberties and what that level of supervision and surveillance is about, but I think the benefits are significant, and I prefer to have the benefits with some restraint to protect people's rights, rather than to ignore the benefits and carry on in a way that might not make best use of the available technology. I just want to take a few minutes at the end just to talk about one particular form of technology, and this is the seamless transition, by the way, just in case you didn't notice it. And it's to talk about communications data. I think there's going to be many people in the room who know what I'm talking about, but for those who may not, I'm just going to take a couple of seconds just to sketch it out. The police use technology to to observe people's communication. Okay? Bearing in mind that if you've got one person committing a crime, how they communicate is not of great value. Somebody who uses threatening behaviour, somebody who assaults someone, there are various ways of investigating that. But where more than one person, people group together, then there's some kind of conspiracy. And the communication between them can be really significant in producing evidence to present to a court. The most intrusive form of surveillance I suppose, on the telephone, is around listening to the conversation. Relatively small number of intrusions there, entirely garnered by a warrant which the Home Secretary alone can sign off. So it's a very small portal. It's a very high bar. Very serious crime. Counter-terrorism, you know, someone's life's at risk, or you're dealing with a very serious crime. There's a definition of that. But there is also other data that we use in either investigating or preventing crime or saving people's lives or preventing them from injury, which is called communications data. And it's that latter I just want to take a few seconds just to talk about. Because of the way that technology is changing, that telephone companies, of some of which I suspect may be represented in the room, do not have to store data in the same way. So that technological change to do with the way that digital data is stored means that that information is not available in the same way as it was. So a new system has to develop. That will lead to new legislation, which has just been put into the Queen's speech for this session of Parliament. Now, the change, as far as I understand it, that's proposed around the law is entirely to do with the change of technology rather than to do with any more intrusion that anybody expects to deliver for the police or the security service. So it's the same level of intrusion, but it's a different way of doing it. Although some seem to be portraying it as more intrusion rather than less. I think it's actually net neutral, but it's a different way of doing it. The second thing is that I would want to say in everything I say, I'm not going to say anything about, one, how that capture of data should be done, because I'm no technologist. I don't know how it should be done. I don't know what the optimum way is. That's for someone else to talk about. I'm going to talk a little about why it's important and vital for me that we keep it, and we keep it in the way that we do it now. But the second thing is to say that in terms of the communications data that we get now, it does allow us, first of all, to catch criminals or to save life. And we've got to maintain that ability. Because if we don't have it, I genuinely think lives can be lost, or will be lost, without that sort of information. Now, it allows us, first of all, to collect evidence, but it also allows us to collect intelligence. And both are vital in the fight against crime. To give you some indication of how important it is, communications data has played a role in every major security service CT operation. I know I see Peter Clark here in the audience, who might be able to say a little about that from his experience over the past decade, and in 95% of serious organised criminal operations. So for me, it's vital that we retain this ability. It provides investigative leads, it establishes links between conspirators, as I've said. One of the challenges as to whether or not we should continue to use it in its present format, is that the thing we keep getting hit over the head with is there are 500,000 requests for this information a year. Huge number, 500,000. And it sounds very damning. Bear in mind there's only 80,000 people in prison. There's 6 times more applications we make. It seems to me those people who make the argument that that's a large number are saying it sounds like that's 500,000 targets, and that's not the case. So let's just linger over the 500,000 for a second. That 500,000 is broken down into 2 groups. It's broken down into those who are suspects and those people who we want to protect, the victims. So I'll give you a couple of ideas about some of the victims that we use this communications data for. If someone goes missing, it'd be really helpful to find out where they are if their life is at risk. Not if just because they're trying to avoid their parents or you know, they just want to hide from society. That's entirely okay. But in terms of actually trying to find people who are at risk, it's a vital piece of information. Secondly, and this may seem stupid, but it's true, is that anybody who steals a mobile phone, occasionally they actually ring one of their friends with the phone. Really good information to try and find who stole the phone. Now, I'm not saying they all do it, but where they do, we might as well find out. It's another way in which the victim supports the investigation. And there are other occasions when we, with consent, get this data and then use it as part of the intelligence or part of the evidence in the trial. You know, you can be talking about an alibi. It's not the suspect, but the person who said that they were talking to a person from a certain place. Then it's really interesting to know whether what they said is true. And certainly in many of the crimes, it helps to establish or not establish the validity of what people are talking to us about. Now, in terms of the protections we've already got in place, we already have in place that each request is assessed individually, either by an inspector or superintendent. An inspector can only sign off to get the subscriber. Anything more than that, whether that be where the phone was, who they were ringing, and how long the call lasted, and any other information that we can get from that source, that has to be signed off by a superintendent. And sometimes people get a bit confused about police ranks. There are quite a few, I realise that. But bear in mind, you remember I told you about the 32 boroughs? One of those is headed generally by a chief superintendent. So one of that person's team, the superintendents, is the next level down. He was responsible in Lambeth for about 1,200 people and a budget probably about £50 million, and all the things that happen in Lambeth for 24 hours. So they're pretty significant characters who deal with risk every day and are, don't easily agree to things that they don't agree with. And their career's at risk if they get it wrong. Of course, they're held to account in the courts, and also their decision-making is held to account by the intrusive surveillance commissioners who visit once a year and want to understand why certain things were made available. I just wanted to finish really by just giving you a few examples of some of the areas in which that 500,000, which sounds like a frightening number, I've already broken it down for you a little, just to say why in some individual cases, why that number is not quite so terrifying. Bear in mind that when you have one target, that person will often have access to different communications methods. So I'm not asking everybody in here, but 99.9% of the population has a landline. Mobile phone, not sure of the penetration, but very high. Sometimes more than one mobile phone. Internet access, iPad, and so on. So one person may account for multiple applications depending on exactly what the need is. Then within each of those devices, there may be specific information to do with a certain time, a certain place, rather than a generic. So it can be that you get multiple applications in the same job. I'm going to talk to you about 3 particular cases, some of which you may remember, where the number of applications was very significant, and I hope you would accept that they may have been justified. You might remember that 3 suspects were involved in the shooting of 5-year-old Tusa Kamala Surawaran in Brixton in March of 2011. Many of you might remember in the news those horrible images of a young girl who was shot while she thought she was safe, playing in a shop. In order to secure the convictions of Nathaniel Grant, Anthony McCalla and Kazim Kulawali, the investigation team submitted 127 applications for communications data, which resulted in making 324 requests, 55 for subscriber information, 72 for traffic data. So huge numbers from 3 suspects who were convicted and went to prison for life, as they should have. In another case, 6 members of an East European gang were convicted in 2011 of a sophisticated fraud from a high street bank. With the use of a Trojan virus, they transferred £3.1 million electronically into bogus accounts. Sadly, a growing issue that we're all trying to understand and do more about. The cash was then immediately withdrawn from the banking system. During the investigation, 160 applications were submitted and 479 requests were made. So you can see from one crime that the number of applications is multiplied out. We're not just talking about one target, one phone, one application. This week, the Met assisted the Dutch authorities by arresting a woman wanted for an attempted murder in Holland. She'd fled to the UK and was a threat and danger to Londoners. She was arrested as a result of communications data being gathered and her cell location focused patrolling officer to a search area where she was detained on description. That required 20 services, 9 requests for subscriber information and 11 for traffic data. That was one person that we were trying to find from another country who'd arrived in this country. And then the final example I was going to talk about was the British Pregnancy Advisory Service was subject to a cyber attack recently, which you might have seen in the press. 10,000 contact records were stolen, and a Twitter profile was subsequently boasted of the attack and threatened to release the 10,000 contact records. Very sensitive information for all those people involved. These records are those women who had been advised by the BAPA either regarding abortion, sexual health and contraception. So the ramifications were significant. And again, that led to the TIU making 10 requests for data from the internet service provider and eventually leading to finding the hacker. So I'm just trying to give you a few anecdotes, and I accept that those are anecdotes, but overall the numbers, we need to give a better account of the overall numbers. But generally, I hope to be able to show that, first of all, this information is vital for crime generally, either to prevent it, save lives, or to, particularly in serious crime. And secondly, the communications data is as valuable to us because it's evidence as well. You remember going back to the telephone intercept? I'm not going to get into the discussion tonight unless people want to do. I don't really want to get into this about whether the content of the call should be evidence. At the moment, it's not. It cannot be put into a court, except for one very special area, which is ironic. And so, but anyway, generally, you can't put it into a court. But you can put the other data in. It's evidence. You can say that phone rang that phone. at that time, queried from that place. And that can be vital in establishing a conspiracy or disproving another piece of evidence. It's not conclusive, but it's certainly always indicative. And it's certainly proved very, very valuable in terms of how we investigate crime right around the country. But I've given you a few examples from London. I'm only going to, probably just one thing to add on that. Some of the discussions about that topic, which I think are very important, have assumed that the gradual deterioration of the ability to look at this type of information will be a slope. So we've already lost some of this information. I'm not going to talk about percentage, but we've lost some. If you're not careful, people assume that, 1 year, 2 years, it goes down like this. Well, if the people who we are looking at get to know about it, it'll go like that. You bear in mind that there's 80,000 people in prison. Does anybody think if one of them gets to know what we can't do, they won't tell the mate? That threat is there all the time. So the technology is changing, the knowledge is changing, and the more we talk about it, the higher the risk gets. So instead of just being a technological degradation, it's also going to be a knowledge degradation, and that will go like that, should that knowledge get out there. So it's a real risk now, which I think we all need to take very seriously. Only in closing, just to say a couple of things, just to remind us of the way hopefully the best, I can't say the best lecturers, but hopefully sometimes the best teachers think about. Just to remind you of something, just really what I've talked about. One, the challenges for the Met. 2, what we're trying to achieve. And number 3, particularly around technology, some of the great opportunities I think that still exist when the police service right across the country spends £1.2 billion on technology, and I would argue doesn't get the best bangs for the bucks. And we've got a great opportunity, I think, now with NewCo to start to look at how we might get more out of that, but it is going to be a great challenge. And I've tried to concentrate on one particular area of technology where I think there is a present and significant risk. And I accept entirely it is for Parliament to legislate and for politicians to decide how to protect individuals' rights and to decide how to do it. I can only advise you from my professional point of view, if we were to lose this in any way, we collectively will be far worse off. I think both people's safety will be compromised, as will the criminal justice system, and our ability to effectively investigate both serious and volume crime. But thanks for taking the time to listen, particularly the people who've been stuck at the back, probably getting warmer and warmer by the second. I appreciate that. But thanks for listening, and obviously happy to take any questions should there be any.
Okay, we have about 25 minutes for questions. There should be a couple of roving mics as well. So if you can say who you are and your organisation, and we'll take a couple to start with. Okay, and there's a lady at the back there.
Hi, my name's Cassell Bryan-Lowe. I'm a journalist with the Wall Street Journal. For the UK's Olympic security effort this summer, as regards the counter-terror effort, what do you think the biggest challenge is going to be?
First of all, I think if you looked at the games generally, the biggest potential threat is obviously around terrorism. There are other threats, so protest is a possibility. And I'm going to linger on that for a second, because we saw with the boat race, one person can embarrass, can obstruct, can cause obstruction, but that didn't kill anybody. It's an annoyance, and for the people who were involved, I'm sure that they were very angry about the fact they'd taken all that time to train, and then something happened that disrupted them, and it was an embarrassment. I suspect that there is that risk for the games. We've already seen some examples of that. And there are other things about crime generically, which might happen, fraud or other types of crime that might be associated with the games, but I don't think they're very high risk. So the biggest thing we worry about is terrorism, where they want to kill people or very seriously harm them. There is no known specific threat to the Olympic Games. And that's not quite the same as saying there aren't people out there, if they got the opportunity, would hurt someone. So we're working together with the security services to do our best to keep people safe. We've increased the level of policing in London. There's about 12,000 officers on the highest point dedicated to policing the Olympics, 8,000 coming from the rest of the country, about 4 from the Met. So the amount of protective policing in there is pretty good. The protection around the Olympic sites, both by physically and also by guarding, is significant. Now it's 25,000 guards around the various sites. And a lot of work has been done to make sure that people who work there and visit have been vetted in the appropriate way. So I suppose the broad answer is that we know there's a risk, a blindingly obvious risk, when over 1 billion people are going to watch live on on TV. If you want to make your point, then it's a great opportunity. So we have to be alive to that risk. We've done you've been planning for 2 to 3 years, and we believe we're in a good place to make sure people are kept safe. There can be no guarantees, but in my view, a huge amount of work has been put in by some very able people, which will keep the visitors and the athletes safe. And the other thing we have to make sure is, of course, we don't take our eye away from the point that during the Olympics, another venue for an attack may be seen as an attack on the Olympics. And that's a great challenge, but we're working together with the transport infrastructure to make sure that people are kept safe.
Okay, lady here, and then Danny Shaw at the back.
Hi, I was a special constable for a while, and then I decided to become a volunteer staffer. I work with police cadets at the moment. The reason I wanted to get involved with the police is to sort of understand the culture, understand what works and what doesn't from the ground up. I noticed in your sort of speech you spoke about it being in Merseyside and actually getting a change in the number of complaints. Are there any cultural problems in terms of the Met, and how do you go about actually shifting that from the ground?
Okay.
And just take Danny's question at the same time.
Yeah, sure.
Commissioner, we've had a very, very strong statement this evening from...
I can hear you, Danny. I can't
Yeah,
see
we've
you.
had a... it's Danny Shaw from the BBC. We've had a very strong statement this evening from Rebecca Brooks and Charlie Brooks, essentially accusing the police of wasting money on the phone hacking inquiry, saying that the equivalent of 8 murder squads are working on the investigation. It's an expensive sideshow, Rebecca Brooks has said, and her husband has accused the authorities of a witch hunt against her. I just wondered if you could give us a reaction to that. I understand you can't comment on the charges themselves, but on a reaction to their general complaints.
I'm going to deal with that one first. Just say I'm not going to comment on their reaction. It'd be quite improper when we're in the middle of a criminal justice process, and the worst thing I can do is damage it, and I'm not going to do that. So if you don't mind, I'm not going to take that opportunity. In terms of the point about cultures, they are, as you know, I mean, cultures are complex, and I don't profess to be an expert. But what I do know is that you can do something to change them, but probably best if you do it to some extent with a grain and get its heart. And the worst attempts I've seen in the past have been when you've pointed your finger in the chest of a culture and said, you're wrong, you're awful, and I'm going to change you. So although I didn't talk about it a lot, we said we were going to do 3 things I took over: cut crime, cut costs, and change culture. The ways I've found that work in the past is, one is you need to work through the leaders we picked. So out of that 50,000 people, we picked 7,000 leaders. There's some others as well, but broadly we picked 7,000. Sergeants, police staff supervisors, and in a hierarchy above. One of the ways that we found in Merseyside that was really powerful was to get that group of people together twice a year. And for a day, the management board did things with them. Sometimes it was about crime fighting, sometimes about how they managed people, sometimes about service delivery. And it wasn't chalk and talk where I stood here and said, you do this. We got other people involved too to make it creative. So we are going to need to invest in training for them and cultural development, but it will mean spending time together. And one of the things I'd like to flag up for me, that if we are going to develop a quality culture, and I think that is a big part of what we need to develop, it will mean that we have to invest in training, but and see it as an investment, not a cost. Now, that's the same as sending everybody on a course for 6 weeks. That's not really the point. But, if we're not careful, we've got sergeants at 20-odd years service who haven't seen a training environment for a long time. And then when they get it wrong, we say, why did you do that? Well, because perhaps they haven't been challenged, they haven't been encouraged, they haven't been, continued to be educated. And we've really got to put a huge amount of investment into that, and we will. And one of the things that journalists may challenge us about, why send all those people on those courses? Why are you spending that money? Well, I would say in a recession, even more so, why we need to invest in that type of training. So that's one way. And the other way that I found powerful in the past is to chime into that aspect of the culture which you can get people to listen, which is one of the reasons why I've invested the rhetoric, but it's a mission, not a rhetoric, around crime fighting. Whether you be a cleaner in the Met or Merseyside, or whether you be a commissioner or a detective, the thing that keeps our people coming to work a lot is about the mission to fight crime. And I truly believe that. I mean, it's the thing that, for those who've been on MBA courses will remember, but that visit to NASA that somebody makes and says to the cleaner, well, what do you do here? And their reply is, I'm here to put a man on the moon. And I always thought when I heard that, it's a bit twee, isn't it? It's a bit glib. But I believe it. And I always thought if I got an organisation, I'd want the cleaners to respond, we're here to stop robbers. And they do. You know, during the riots, there's a cleaner who cleans the 8th floor at New Scotland Yard. She lives at Southwark, and during the riots, the buses were off. So she walked in from Southwark. Bearing in mind, this woman starts at 4 o'clock in the morning. So she's walked in, I don't know how long it took her, I imagine about an hour, and I don't know how I presume she got home the normal way because the buses were back. And we've got people like that who do that. The catering department played precious little, but incredibly flexible. One of the things I would just finally say, although I want our culture to continue to develop in the way I think which is positive, I wouldn't throw away the benefits of what we've got. Some people say we're the last unreformed public service. Well, I put my 50,000 aside of any of yours. In terms of flexibility, yeah, anybody's I'll put mine outside of. You know, turn up early for work, they work through the meal times. Facing people with knives, you don't pay them for. There has to be something else that drives them. It seems to me you've got to celebrate that and capture that and work with it while challenging it how it might develop and get better. Because I can't change the 50,000 overnight. I can't slot another 50,000 in. We've got to get the hearts and work with the strengths that we have. And there are some pretty remarkable people. And I'll get rid of the ones who are wasting our time, dishonest, racist, or whatever they happen to be. But the vast majority of them are good people who are trying hard to do the right thing. And it's my task to make sure that I bring that out. But I don't think we get there by saying that they're all evil or they're all terrible people, because I don't think they are.
Okay, Alan Travis.
Alan Travis from The Guardian. If I could, we could discuss the question of communications data. I'm sure and I appreciate that there are very serious national security and also crime reasons why you want to close the gap on the communications data that you can access at present, and the changing nature of technology, which means that up to 25% of the requests you mentioned are no longer able to be met because the CSPs don't collect the data. But I wonder how you would respond to the point made recently by Sir David Omand in a Russi pamphlet, when he said that there is a wider price to be paid here in terms of public confidence in the open internet web, and that government and business in this country rely enormously on the idea of an open net, an open internet, and that if we move to a situation where everyone's transactions on the web are stored and retained for 12 months and are accessible not only by your good selves but also by even local authorities and so on, that public confidence can be lost and harmed. Thank you.
I'll take that point on, but I mean, my challenge would be that's not new. That's what happens now. Someone stores that data. And the state will have no more access to that than they had in the past. It isn't as though the state are going to take a big computer and put it in the New Scotland Yard and say, we're going to keep it. If it's available somewhere, they will still have to go through an authorisation process. So it seems to me that it is vital. So we're no more likely to get hold of your internet data than we were before. And you're shaking your head, but I don't know what system is going to be put in place that's going to make me more likely. No, but why does the purpose for which it's kept just change the point that it's kept? It's kept somewhere. I don't have it. I will not have it in the future. The challenge is whether or not it's available, surely. And it seems to me that if we want to give that opportunity away, then let's do that. But I honestly think that if we do that, there is a risk. What I don't say is that there is no risk the other way. I agree entirely that we need to protect people's rights. But I'm not arguing that we have access to everybody's internet stuff. It is just to maintain the opportunity to do it, not to say that the police should keep it all and then pry into it whenever they would like. Now, you know, people may argue that they don't trust the police, but we've already got 2 or 3 levels of intrusion. We can only get a telephone intercept if the Home Secretary says yes. We can only get when we've got authorisation processes. You've got 2 surveillance commissions, 2 sets of commissioners. These are retired Court of Appeal judges who go around every one of the 43 forces and look into their intrusion around. We haven't talked about probes, microphones, which is a different form of intrusion. I would argue actually far more intrusive at times, and that's evidence. And that is monitored by these commissioners who go around and look, and then you've got another set of commissioners who go around and look at how we use this other material. So what I'm not saying is that there is not a debate and not an argument, but I genuinely think that we'd be foolish to throw it away, that's all. But I accept that there will be another point of view, and the point of balance will have to be drawn.
Okay, take a few more if there's any more. Yes, Chris there, and gentleman just to his left.
Chris Heathcote from Serco, and also serving Special Constable with the Met for 4 years.
Well done.
Commissioner, you talked about transforming technology, and I recognise a lot of what you say. Given that 80% of your spend is on staff, Just briefly, how do you want to transform your workforce? Who do you, if you serve your 7 years and you stay till 2016, 17, how do you want the Met's workforce to look differently? Staff versus officers? Who do you want to recruit? Who would you like to leave? How do you want them deployed? How do you want them to work differently?
You want names? I'm going to try and answer that best I can. I mean, in terms of the split of whether it's police officers or staff, I don't have a strong view about. I mean, we need a level of policing because if you know, at the end of the day, if push comes to shove, somebody's going to have to do the policing part. If we're not careful, everybody says they want to be a police officer, but not the hard bits. You know, well, why do you need police powers to interview? No, I don't suppose you do, really. Why do you need police powers to gain forensic evidence? Okay, I'll live with that one. What it sounds like to me is, if you're not careful, somebody says, I tell you what, provided you provide me with a compliant prisoner, that's fine, I'll deal with the rest. That puts the police in the position of only dealing with the violent, the recalcitrant, and if somebody says, you're not coming in my property, we have to do that too. Now, I don't think that's the right way to go. I think we have to show a broad brand of reasonableness, and we don't have to artificially segmentise the policing job. So I'm not a great believer that you segmentise the job and then say, right, that's your job to interview, that's your job to do analysis. The policing job, I think, I'm not quite sure it's a profession. But actually, we get murder detectives and counter-terrorist detectives because they've cut their teeth on the shoplifters, hopefully metaphorically. You know what I mean? If you make a mistake with a shoplifter, it's not ideal, but a court might discover it. Best you did that, then you did it with a terrorist offence. So I suppose, first of all, there's just a broad point. I think, you know, policing numbers matters because we need a resilience within what we do. And although I don't argue entirely for omnicompetence, we do need some level of it to allow us to flexibly deploy our resources. I think the second thing, in answer to your point about what should the Met look like, one of the things I would love to see, for example, is that we are essentially a mobile culture. You know, we do have people walking, but essentially we operate from cars and obviously from some buildings. But I want to see our car become a mobile office. You know, that you've got an iPad in, that you can get tasked by, you can update a computer by, you can take into a scene of crime, record a crime quickly, and then leave, and not have 100 people sat in a room doing this, or this. That doesn't sound very efficient to me. But it fundamentally appreciates, we have to fundamentally change our processes. So our crime reports at the moment might have 8 pieces of data. Who are you? Where do you live? Where did the crime happen? Because that might be different. When did it happen? Did you see the offence? I'll not go on. So lots of pieces of data, to which my challenge is, how much of that actually stopped another person suffering crime or caught your offender? And the sad reality is that that very long crime report does neither. Forensics do. Somebody tells you who did it does, or you catch them doing it. So the point of making that point is, if you've only got 4 pieces of data to find and you have a Windows-based solution, then why can't I take an iPad into a place and say, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And in fact, the iPad just tell me where I am. I don't need to populate it with your address. Seems to me that's got to be far better. And if the same iPad can take my fingerprints on the street, if that be appropriate, then why aren't we doing that? And this vehicle, and it's carrying a big battery around with it that powers the car, might reinvigorate the iPad and not go on. I mean, we're just looking at cars at the moment that can have ANPR fitted 360 degrees, take CCTVs too. Now, there's a debate to have, as Alan talked about earlier, about how much of this is appropriate and intrusive, and that's fine. But technologically, these are things that can make a real difference. And I won't go on about some of the other opportunities that I think exist. I will. No, just one. There's a guy, I'm going to forget what's Simon's surname? Pardon? Gordon. Sorry, Simon Gordon. He runs Gordon's Wines Bar. It's come up with something called Face Watch. I don't know if everybody's seen that. It's great development. Where is he?
Simon's not here. I'm Simon Burgess, the MD.
Ah, okay. Right, well, this is not me selling your... I'm not selling your product, but I am in a way, because I think the intellectual... Well, I mean, I just think it's a good idea. It's not for you to sell your business. I'll explain and say, you usually explain better your business model. But what Simon got fed up of is in his bar was people who committed a crime and then wandered off and the police took ages to come for the CCTV. And then eventually, you know, truth gets its boots out and something happens. So what Simon decided to do was to develop a system where he could give us the CCTV online and we could see it quickly. He could share it quickly with the adjacent bars. So, you know, if this person comes in your bar because there's some facial recognition on it too, you might want to refuse them entry because they've just hit one of our customers. We don't really like that, but we haven't found them yet. The other thing it does as well is that it shares very quickly a statement. Better than ours do. Very quickly, it comes down the line, a statement arrives with it. Now, if you took the spirit of that, now the business model, if I understand it, because I think broadly it's been offered free, is that you sell the advertising around the network. And that's, you know, that's how...
Correct, yes.
Pardon?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, so that's broadly how they'll make the money. But the idea is such a simple one. But I suppose the challenge is, why can't ours mimic that? Remember what I said about ANPR? Where's the strategy? You know, why isn't there a strategy that says ANPR might be fitted around the motorway network? So the best definition I heard of serious and organised crime was motorway crime. The people who provide 80 kilos of heroin up to Scotland and vice versa go on the motorways. They don't go on different roads to you and I. And yet we don't have a strategy that really effectively monitors those areas. So I just give it as a few ideas where I think technology can make a difference. And of course the other side of that is we need people with the skills to give some ideas and make best use of it. And some of our people have, but I think we need far more.
Okay, we've got time for just a few more questions. So, gentleman there, who I've already identified, and then the gentleman to his right, and then the last question at the back there.
Yeah, I'm Tom Lloyd, a former Chief Constable, and I wanted to ask you a question about effective policing, if that's okay. I'm due to address a conference, an international drug policy conference in Kiev next week, and I'm hoping to have something positive to say. Because the context is that since Richard Nixon declared the war on drugs about 40 years ago, we've seen a huge increase in drug consumption, we've seen increase in death, disease, and all the problems I think we're all familiar with, including massive costs to the criminal justice system, which many would argue have been wasted at worst and ineffective. So I was wondering whether in your concept of total policing, you've got some ideas, some innovative ideas about how law enforcement within prohibition, because getting rid of prohibition is not on the agenda, whether there are some ideas you've got, which I could perhaps take to Kiev with me. Obviously, I've got some of my own. But it would be helpful, Bernard, if you could assist me. Thanks.
It wasn't that convincing, Tom, at the end, no. Are you being paid for that? No. Anyway, but the...
I'm an independent drug policy advisor. All I have is the pittance that we know a police pension is.
Don't start getting onto public pensions. We'll never... Yeah, well, there's a few moans in the room. There's a few people in the room who are benefiting from it. Okay, probably two things I'd suggest. Well, no, three. Sorry, I keep getting my numbers wrong. Three things I'd point out. One thing we've already started in the Met, something we started in Merseyside. We called it Operation Hawk. Wasn't my idea. There was a sergeant on the Wirral who he came up with a great, blinding strategic insight. Why do we keep putting lots of resources into lots of surveillance? Why don't we just put the door in? But the test was whether you could get a magistrate to give you a warrant. That was a test. And if you could convince the magistrate to give us a warrant, then we'd put the door in. And that is something we started in the Met already, probably more to do with it. But the theory behind it is that, you know, obviously, you know, drugs supply and purchase does, to some extent, drive proprietorial crime. And of course, when you go through the door very quickly, they don't know you come in. Sometimes you find cash, sometimes weapons. It's one way of keeping on the back foot, and you get convictions too. But the fundamental point is don't spend ages, you know, not doing anything, not least of which is the people who complain to you down the street about being fed up of it don't know you're doing anything. So, you know, I think there's something there of momentum. And at the other end of the market, which is around the organised crime side, I would argue, and this is something we haven't done something about yet, if you accept the theory that organised crime has got two bases really, fundamentally drugs. We could talk about lots of other things, cybercrime, but fundamentally it's around the supply of controlled drugs. And if you accept the reason for that is money, and then you look at how much we invest in forensic accounting to track the money, you're probably nearer to 3% of the investment is around tracking the money, and about 90% of the investment is around following them around. We've talked about the technical things that we do. So we're very strong on following them around and establishing a conspiracy while the money's being salted away. Well, why don't we do both in parallel, proportionate to the challenge that we've got? And I would argue that we aren't investing enough at the minute in people who track money and assets and then get it from them, regardless sometimes where they prosecute. And that is nowhere near the order of what we want to achieve. And the final thing I would highlight is something that is slightly off the point, but I hope you'll accept the brief diversion. Kit Malthouse, as Stephen's predecessor, pushed, and we were at the same lecture a few years ago, about something called sobriety. And a lot of people have picked that up as an idea. For those who haven't, South Dakota, District Attorney comes up with another blinding strategic insight because there were lots of people down on the road in a rural area. They didn't think they were going to get caught drink driving. So what he decided to do was to say, right, instead of trying to stop the drunk driver driving, I'm going to try and stop them getting drunk. So in South Dakota, and now in the surrounding states as it's spread, if you get convicted of drunk driving for a period of time, let's say a year, morning and night, you have to go in and get tested for alcohol. And if you fail, you go to prison for a day, sorry, not for a year. Good idea, but I'm revealing my roots. But to be fair, it's a day. 90-odd% of the people who take that test pass. The most direct effect is that they've had a huge reduction in the number of people killed on the roads. The indirect benefit, less domestic violence. Because the people who were going home drunk were doing something else when they got home. Now, the best empirical evidence you've got it works is that surrounding states are taking it on without any great piece of research. But if you pause for a second, for me, what I thought one of the things it might be about as well is thinking, let's move it over to drugs for a second. I don't know if you're waving to me or disagreeing, but I know what you mean. But I think the point I'm making is not about necessarily criminalising, but just pause with a thought. If you are trying to affect the demand point, we all employ lots of people. How many drug addicts have you got working for you? I'd argue none of us know. But I don't want to be operated on by one. Nor drive a bus. Nor, you know, some of your organisations will have some very risky operations that you do not want people with cranes, you know. Go through a list. Running your computers. You want your money to buy somebody who's affected by cannabis use that stays in the system for about 28 days. Cannabis that's now far higher potency than the stuff of the 60s. So my point is, what could you do if you started some kind of sobriety testing as employment, not to tell the police, but as an issue of employment? You said, look, you've got a choice. You either change what you're doing, because I don't want you working for me anymore. I'm talking about public service and me at the moment. I pose the challenge. What could we do about teachers, nurses, but not only the public sector, but others. So I suppose my final point is really a more complex, I think we need a sophisticated discussion. That if you want to do something about demand, are we really absolute in our terms that we want to do something about it? Or we just say, well, we know it happens, but provided they're not causing trouble, we're not doing anything about it. Where does somebody think that these millions of pounds come from? The cocaine use that's getting, where's the money's coming from people employed generally, or from it getting stolen. There's a significant amount coming from people who hold a job down. If we truly want to do something, I think we've at least got to think about that, rather than thinking about the other extreme, which Tom I know just touched on, about legalisation. What about really trying to see what we can do about demand and supply, perhaps in the way that I've just discussed?
Okay, and last two quick questions. Gentleman there, and then my colleague Rory at the back.
Commissioner, good evening. Thanks very much for a good presentation. Tariq Ghafoor, there is a recent debate around private policing, and a lot of private sector organizations now moving into the kind of the operational arena. Would you support in London a creation of a kind of a community protection force that is trained, credited, perhaps given powers equivalent to PCSOs for either on a voluntary basis or on a paid basis, actually policing, creating shared responsibility for security amongst certain communities? Thank you.
Have you got an interest to declare?
I'm just scoping that.
Yeah, just easy. If I stick with the first part of what you said, or first question, the point about the contract, I think that Surrey and West Midlands have established, which is a call-off contract for the rest of the country. There's one part I don't agree with. I don't agree with that included in the spec for the contract is patrolling and investigation. In my view, unless we completely change our model of policing, that's something that states should retain, not should be down to private enterprise. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I don't think that private enterprise can do a lot to help us. I just talked about forensic recovery of assets. Huge amount, I think, that we could contract out and work with other people and probably incentivise. Look at the criminal seizure of assets. Something there that I would certainly support. You looked at, we talk about communications data, huge stacks of data, and that's really a challenge for us to deal with. That's another area you could see that commercial entities could help with. So I have a problem with patrolling and with investigation. I suppose you could argue that we've already got one of the things you describe if it's voluntary. I mean, for example, the Community Security Trust, the Jewish security organisation, exists and has done for many years, very professional outfit, maintains security around not only synagogues but other places of faith and other gathering points. So that's one area in which one community is organised and achieved something pretty significant in a national way. And there's a partner, as you know, that we work with very well. So I support people, volunteers working in that way. Then it's just how far down the spectrum you go as towards whether it's the other extreme, vigilantes. and at one extreme whether it's about profit. It seems to me as soon as profit comes into it, it changes the nature of the debate. So that's where I'd at the very least want to discuss it. And I have some reservations, if I'm honest.
Okay, and last quick question at the back.
Rory Gagan from Policy Exchange. Sort of following on, I suppose, from that question, if we all sort of buy into some of the Pelian principles around the public being the police and the police being the public and so on, we've heard mention already of the volunteer sort of staff within the police. We've already heard mention of special constables. What other sort of initiatives do you think there might be to sort of help sort of cement that bond? Are we talking about sort of some of the examples you might see around the country of community courts would be one area? Another area might be sort of enabling people to sort of be more proactive, like the Face Watch guys have been around, sort of being able to go to the Met and say, look, we want to do this. How do we make it happen? So how receptive are you to those sorts of offers? And do you have any plans for any of those sorts of activities?
At a starting point, I think you've got to be open to ideas. So I mean, I've put some reservations on the table about some aspects. And I'm only trying to indicate, you know, where my reservations are. I don't mean so that you will dismiss everything already, but I'm telling you honestly how I see things at the moment. But I think, you know, if somebody's got an idea, then you at the very least need to listen to it. And my test is generally, can they deliver? You know, everybody's got ideas. You've got thousands of small organisations running around saying we are doing X. When you look into it, it's not always that profound. You know, a city the size of London, one borough, two boroughs, well, it will have an impact. I'm not saying that's wrong. But if we want to achieve strategic effect, I think they've got to have the ability to deliver either with a simple idea or with a common network of some kind. So that's one of the things I'm always looking at. I'll give you an example of one that we're looking at the moment. One of the challenges I didn't talk about was gang work. You know, if you look right across the 32 boroughs, it was said that when I was appointed, I only said that we're going to lead on gang work in London because the Mayor and Kit Malthouse had said it was a problem before. It wasn't. I'd have had to be deaf not to have heard the number of people who were telling me there was a problem. 250 gangs, 62 serious harm ones. They're responsible for 50% of shootings, 15% of rapes, 25% of serious violence, 20% of muggings. These people are having a disproportionate effect. And the 62 high harm ones are about 4,000. 7.5 million of us, and 4,000 of them are causing us real problems. So there's a real need for why we need to do something about this group. We just put 1,200 police into a command, which is bigger than many forces in this country, that's going to do our best across 19 boroughs to do something about that. But it will have two legs. One is enforce the law. So if they're hurting people, they're going to get locked up. Because we can't have them stabbing and shooting people, delivering drugs and getting away with it. Something's got to be done. But some of these gang members are getting involved at 13, 14, 15. Now, in my view, there's no good putting them into the criminal justice system that broadly they've had it. By the time they get to prison, you know, they're gone. So if there's anything at that age, when often they need more support than they do judgment, that we can do together around diversion, then I think that's a real area we can all invest in. Now, there are some good things there, but I think there's also some untapped things. There's St Giles Trust, for example, do some great work, and we're going to look see if we can work with them. There's the black churches. This is not a black or racial problem, but there are a disproportionate number of black youngsters involved. But the black church is a group, the Jesus Church up in Barnet, 600 churches, have an event twice a year with 40,000 people at them. These are people who are not, one, there's large numbers, huge penetration. More important than that, rather than rhetoric, they do stuff. So there are those groups out there who can be energised and are energised by the thought that they could do something to serve a young person in the best possible sense. You know, do something about literacy, you know, do something about employment, do something about helping to take them out of some of the areas in which they are terrified. Because many of these gang members may start off hard but end up terrified. They don't know how to get out of these gangs. Because you and I, we might have social mobility. We can pick up our bed and walk somewhere else. You carry on living on some of these estates when you're falling out with someone, and it's not a very nice life. So some of them are terrified into this regime, but I think together there's a huge amount we can do. So I'll give that as one example, but there are many who I think by working with other people who have another motive sometimes, but generally for the safety of society.
Okay, thank you. Great. I might just ask Stephen to... Yes, thank you, Commissioner. I'll just ask, before we end, the Deputy Mayor Designate, Stephen Greenhouse, to just issue the vote of thanks.
Well, thank you, Blair. I wasn't expecting to give the vote of thanks, nor were you, because I think you had Kit penciled in, and they say that it's a week is a long time in politics, and I was quietly relaxing after the exertions of the mayoral elections and got a call at 7:43 on Saturday, and my life has at least changed for the next few weeks, subject to confirmation. But I want to say that It's ironic that I've been to Policy Exchange twice in the last few years, and the last time was when Bill Bratton was invited, and I thought he came across as well as an incredible professional that achieved great things not only in New York but latterly then in Los Angeles with a very different political environment. He was accountable to the mayor in New York. He was accountable to, I guess, a council in Los Angeles. And despite the political issues, he delivered for those people with different levels of resources. And I think tonight we've heard from a real professional with a sense of mission, with everybody in London willing him on to do great things. And we know that we've got a great, effective police force, but now the challenge is how do you make that more efficient? And how do you make sure it's respected and loved? Because there's just one statistic that troubles me, and that is a question that comes up in the confidence survey, which says, how good a job do you think the policing in London is? And the rating is 55%. Now, that probably needs to be understood. But that does mean that 45% of people do not think the police service, the Metropolitan Police Service, is doing a particularly good job. And I think we need to understand that, whilst the numbers for crimes are going down. And I think that's a challenge, as well as the cultural challenges that you've talked about today. But we've got a fantastic situation, a new commissioner that will last 7 years, delivering fantastically for London. Thank you very much.